Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another Backlog Banter ethereal topic video. You know and love us for these, and we are getting back to our roots after spending a little bit of time in the land of nominations and breaking those down. TGA is over. It's the end of the year, but we want to get a weird video in. And this is a topic that I kind of accidentally stumbled on while I was talking in the Discord a couple days ago. The idea of future nostalgia. And that sounds weird. It might be the weirdest single name topic video that we've done in terms of a concept, because what does that actually mean? And for me, what grabbed me so acutely about this idea was that it's more of a thought exercise than anything. We're not analyzing anything that's happened. We're not analyzing genre trends or anything. We're trying to put ourselves in the shoes of what will it be like 10 years from now, looking back on what current era of games. And we're using that in the largest possible sense by saying 2013 to 2023, the last decade of games. That's 2 generations worth of games. That's everything from PS4, Xbox One, Wii U forward. How will we feel looking back on it? Genre trends, developer trends, certain games that came out, the start of new things in the industry, new patterns, those sort of things that won't last forever. And by the time we're 10 years from now, some of this stuff's going to be less popular. Some of these developers are not going to exist anymore, or they'll have shifted in different ways. Different publishers or subscription services, different things won't exist in the same way they do now. And even though it's hard to imagine in the moment, we will be feeling nostalgic 10 years from now for a lot of these things. And those are the things we're going to try to break down and pinpoint and bring into conversation how we're trying to make these decisions. Like, is it because we feel good about them now, or maybe we feel bad about them, what we think we'll feel better about them in the future once they've ended? Maybe we can also bring in things that happened in previous eras that we now feel better about or feel worse about, like how do thoughts change? But primarily, we're using this as a thought exercise to put ourselves in our other selves' shoes, and it's gonna be very, very interesting. And we have a little bit, not enough, frankly. We have a little bit of communication from our audience to read through and spark some other conversation. But Abram, when I came up with this, it kind of like petered off into the wind. People didn't really like grab onto it. But you told me that you thought that this was a pretty interesting idea and that you've thought about it quite a bit over the last few days. So why don't you start this conversation with your thoughts on this, and then whatever that first idea you have of
I was just really interested by this.
Hold on. I want to preface one thing.
Yeah.
I'm currently 2 drinks in on a Bavarian Irish cream whiskey. Now, I do not drink alcohol.
Right.
And I drank this probably 15 minutes ago. This might go downhill, but I'm going to try.
As a sidebar, when we played Everybody 1 2 Switch Drunk, and you had about a quarter of a Smirnoff Ice, you immediately were down for the count. So I'm going to be honest with you, I think you're probably going to be fine. I think that if you haven't hit the wall yet, the wall's
Fair enough.
The wall's
I also got water.
Sure. Yeah,
hydrate myself.
You hydrate. You eat some carbs. You could fucking fill that entire. You could fill that entire room with.
Does this count as carbs?
Yeah, eat the napkin. You could fill that room with beer and drink the whole thing if you eat enough carbs. You know.
Sure. Hey, Ron.
Your
thoughts, please.
Yeah, I think this is a compelling topic because it's one that I couldn't really wrap my head around at first, and frankly, I'm still a little bit lost in it, and I think that's why it'll be an interesting conversation. Just in that. Yeah. You're kind of asking me to get into a very interesting, like subjunctive, hypothetical framework.
Subjunctive?
I think the subjunctive verb tense is when you're, projecting into the future. If that's wrong...
Future past.
Yeah.
There's a future past tense. I know that from Latin. I don't remember what it is. It's like, oh no, that's I will have done something. And I took 6 years of Latin. I don't remember jack shit about it, though.
Here's the point. I think that it's compelling to try to look at the current moment through this lens because, it's very easy
We're really pulling a Benoit Blanc here.
Sure.
Makes no damn sense. It compels me, though.
We're buttressing.
Yeah.
Sort of thinking about the current moment, it's very easy to feel quite cynical. I think there's very obviously a lot of cynicism in games discourse. There's a lot of cynicism in my own thoughts in the industry. I think somewhat for very justified reasons when you look at what a shoddy state the industry is in terms of supporting developers, in terms of job security, in terms of a lot of undercurrents of change in design philosophy and business model, I think there's a lot of reason to be skeptical. But I think you also make a interesting point in that nostalgia often sands those edges down. So this is in some ways a thought exercise. I agree with you, but I think in others it's a sort of more reflective look at the current moment through our own eyes. And I think that's partially how I interpret it. It's in some ways what will we be nostalgic for, what will look better in hindsight, and in others, like what maybe should we actually feel gratitude for in the moment that maybe we don't appreciate now, and we ought to maybe better appreciate it before it's gone.
Well, that's definitely a good point, because that's actually the place where you and I kind of started having this conversation, is not only trying to use this whole thing to reflect on the current moment, but pulling it into conversation with things that have gone by that we now feel nostalgia for that people largely didn't in the moment. One example that you brought up was the 3D platformers in 5th generation that were so prevalent that now people miss. And that was a thing that people were like, there's too many. This is all that game. Every developer is doing this. It's, it's just being churned out, and it's so easy, and most of them are crap. But we look back and we're like, okay, it was kind of fun that there was Croc and Bubsy and Glover and all this
Gex,
nonsense.
and everybody's excited about the remasters now.
Yeah. But so trying to put ourselves in the shoes of how we will feel reflecting in the future with the idea that nostalgia and the passage of time and the changes that will come over the course of the next decade will sand down the rougher edges of now. We might tangentially remember the fact that there were a lot of layoffs this year, or that something like Redfall was really bad, but there is an element to being removed from the time period that paints even the bad things in a positive light. And I think that that's going to be a really fun part of this thought experiment, is in the current day, we just actually less than a year ago played Sonic 06, one of the notoriously worst games of all time. But that game is so bad, it was so bad, that it's reached a sort of point where it's like, it's kind of almost reverse engineered itself to where people enjoy it in ironic ways, and there's a way to like look back on it and be like, oh, actually that was kind of fun, it was cool that Sonic, like kissed a human woman and all that kind of stuff. But that's something that in the time, like, no, it's one of the worst fucking games ever made. People are never going to appreciate this. And so I think that trying to divorce ourselves from the cynicism of the current moment, because that will be washed away over time, and the things that are quality now will be brought up, or the bad things will be reframed. That's what I'm really excited to do. And it's kind of a game that I like to play with myself in terms of trying to push myself outside of my own mental comfort zone. And I think this is a really, really good topic for that.
And you love to play with yourself. Let's make that explicitly
especially on
clear.
Camera and while you're around.
Yeah. Yeah. I think the other thing I was sort of reflecting on is when GTA 6 was announced, and there was the discussion about like what platforms is the game coming to, and we learned that Rockstar, at least as of right now, is planning PS5 and Series alone, Xbox Series alone. There are some headlines on pretty big sites being like, GTA 6 will be next gen only. The reality is we're 3 years into the generation that GTA 6 will be releasing into, and thus it is the current gen. And
Absolutely, the current gen.
Yeah, I mean, the reason I raised...
I'd say 1 year into a generation, you're in the current gen.
I think that the day that the new console releases...
Well,
of
course that's
gen.
Actually true. But I would say culturally, people feel comfortable saying, okay, current gen, once it's been a year.
Sure. My larger point ultimately is like, 2013 was a long time ago. The 8th generation is done. If you want to be a pedant and have a conversation about the Switch, have it with me some other time. The point is, I think this decade is in some ways ready for reflection, and so that's interesting, right? Because I do feel like this is in some ways about gratitude for the current moment, because the delineation between the 8th generation and the 9th generation has been so small. So
definitely.
So it's not necessarily like we're just reflecting on like decisions and trends from the 8th gen, because I think that those are almost all entirely applicable to the 9th also. But I think it's also, you nonetheless have to acknowledge at the same time that 2013, there's a lot of design continuity there in a way maybe there wasn't when we jumped from 6th to 7th generation or 7th to 8th to a lesser degree, but
Yeah.
I think it's an interesting moment to reflect, I guess is my point.
Yeah.
Why don't you hit me with one of your talking points for things about this time that we'll maybe look back on differently?
Okay, well, here is how I'm going to frame my entire conversation around this.
Sure.
I'm trying to place myself in what am I going to be, 50 in 10 years? I can't remember. It's something like that. Around 35-year-old Tucker in about a decade, when I'm looking back on this current times when I just started BLB and I was going to college and high school and the Switch had just released. And the honest to God, genuine truth of this is I see myself in 10 years being as passionately and positively nostalgic about 8th and 9th generation games as people that grew up with Super Nintendo and N64 and PS1 and PS2 and NES as they are now.
Sure.
And I think that that's just me being completely and genuinely honest. It doesn't mean that there aren't flaws with it.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean that there aren't things that on a sort of more critical analytical level I can point out and say, yeah, that was a problem. These things, overtook the industry in bad ways. But this last decade of games from when I turned 13 to now is the only generation of games I have genuinely cared about and been connected to on a very personal level. I played a smattering of games before that. I was a child for most of them, and there were very few of them, but I played some games.
Yeah.
But I'm in a moment right now where, with the wrapping up of the 8th generation of consoles, I'm moving on to a next part of my life where my childhood, as it stands, my middle school, high school days, even through college, that is just wrapping up. And so everything that came from that generation of this generation and a half of consoles and this era of games is not only what I care about most, but on a very subjective level, and I think I can make some solid cases for it.
Yeah.
I think it's when games have been at their best. It's certainly where I've enjoyed the most amount of games.
Sure.
I played the most amount of games from that. And I've also always felt a pretty solid disconnect on a very subjective, internal, personal level from those older generations of games to where I don't have that same reverence looking back.
Yeah.
Or even the ones that I grew up with, like DS and Wii. I played those when I was a kid, but I don't really care. I'm getting a little bit better though because I'm playing fucking touch generation games.
Sure.
But I think I'm going to be pretty much across the board, just super positive and look back and be like, oh my God, basically all my favorite games of all time came out in the 2010s and early 2020s. And this is when the best games of all times and basically every category came out. And so maybe that's kind of admitting defeat when it comes to how much nostalgia will play a part in my mind. But I think that's the honest to God truth of it, is this era, this last decade, is the most important to me for very obvious and very subjective reasons. And I think that my nostalgia will reflect that in 10 years. I'll be like, yeah, no, there was some bad stuff, but that's when games were at their peak, baby. Because I also haven't reached the point where I'm super cynical yet. And I think that is the other point of difference is it's probably going to happen. In the next couple of years, I'm probably going to be like, damn, games are shit now and look how much cooler they used to be. But I have not reached that point yet. And so that I think will be another thing that paints myself in 10 years in a different light of having that cynicism that I don't currently have and ostensibly never have.
Yeah, I mean it's an interesting thing to think about, because if I were to sort of project what I would think your perspective on the industry and things would be in 10 years, I don't know if I would say that about you. But ultimately, this is a pointless conversation to have because neither of us have any evidence. Even you don't, and you're you, and you don't have any evidence to this point, really.
Yeah.
But one thing, I think one of the most astute things you've ever said to me that I always try to think about
write this down.
Is this idea of you want the newest to be the best, because if it's not, that means the medium, whatever medium we're talking about, is not progressing forward.
Yeah.
I was thinking about this most recently with that guy who kind of went around film Twitter saying, I've not given a movie the last 3 years of 5 stars. And it's intellectually incurious to give a recent film a 5-star rating. Mm-hmm. And I was just thinking about this point that you've brought up to me many times, and I've thought about quite often. And so I don't know. Maybe I want the purity of the not Irish whiskey drinking Tucker to remain around in a decade and be continuing to advocate.
Not Irish whiskey drinking Tucker was up until today.
Yeah. So I mean,
that was my entire life until today.
I'm dealing with a totally different person here now.
That's true.
And yeah, it's interesting. I mean, when I think about nostalgia for myself, I mean, my thoughts on the topic are actually quite complicated in some ways. In that, I was reflecting to you when we played We Play recently, sort of in your journey to check off more and more games of that 7th generation era. I'm like, oh, this is a game that I have very acute nostalgia for.
You kept getting excited every time we unlocked a new fucking We Play mini game because you're like, oh, the next one's the best one. The next one's the best one.
Yeah.
And you said that for all of them.
Yeah, and it's interesting because I did say that for all of them. And the cow one is the best. I think we can agree that the cow is the best. But I wouldn't say, for me, I would definitely not say that that's the best generation of games. I don't give a fuck about 85% of the games that were released during that generation, particularly on PS3 and 360. During that generation when I was a kid, I only had a Wii. Even in hindsight, I've felt very little pull to try many games of that era. And I know that this is sinful because you love this game and everyone in the industry loves this game. I have very little interest to play BioShock.
Yeah.
I just don't. I have very particular memories, personal memories of the generation, and I love revisiting a lot of Nintendo stuff from that era, but I certainly wouldn't say, man, the 7th generation, that's the best the games ever were. Yeah. Oh, man, I love those color palettes and that multiplayer and everything, right? I mean, and maybe there will be a time when that generation has more of a halo for me, and I look back on my favorite Halo games that came out of that generation, pun intended, and I look at the cool stuff Sony was doing, and obviously from Nintendo, that era, and refer to it as the best, but in my mind, they're separate. The best and most nostalgic for me are separate, at least right now.
Fair, yeah, totally.
And when if I were to look back on this era, I don't think I would be particularly fond of it. And so that's why this notion of gratitude is what I'm curious to talk about.
Sure. Is gratitude a word I used today?
It's a word that I used of this is partially an exercise to figure out what we should feel gratitude about in the games that release now.
I never remember anything you say, so that has left my mind.
Because I do think that when I reflect back on this, and especially once we get some more data in a couple years as we see where Game Pass goes and we see how the economics of games continue to change, I think that I will remain quite cynical about how a lot of decisions transpired, particularly on like an economic and business level that informed design, and that's always been the case, right? I mean, when people think about a very common point in favor of the 6th generation of PS2, Xbox, and GameCube as of late, especially on Twitter and discourse in general, is this notion that because games are so much cheaper, devs were throwing so much cheaper to make. They were throwing $1 million, $2 million at a new IP, and you could put that out on disc, and it would do pretty well. So every marquee publisher was doing that, thus cultivating the spirit of creativity that I personally agree with. I think that's a great case, but it also highlights how economics and games are sort of intrinsically linked. And so I think when I reflect back, I'll remain cynical in the ways that the economics of the time resulted in more excess, larger worlds, a feeling of a need to justify that price tag for a long time. Yeah. Something you said to me before that we can get into, this notion of games getting bigger and bigger and bigger in their open worlds being a very clear trend of this period. But now we're at a time where that's proving very obviously not sustainable, and thousands of people are losing their jobs every year, and games are releasing buggy and fucked because the expectation is bigger and bigger and bigger, and so probably be a shrinking. And so one way or another, the economics of making these big AAA games are going to be either allowing bloat or maybe forcing restraint. And I think that that's probably one of the major things I'll reflect back on, is the ways that it kind of feels like a AAA bubble kept growing and growing and growing until right now, literally, I think right now as we're recording, we're on the precipice of a pop.
Sure. Yeah.
So I think that will be...
Tomorrow? Holy shit. Someone tell Rockstar.
I think that's something that I don't know if I'll feel good about, right? But it'll be interesting to think back on in 10 years. Just in the ways that smaller dev costs led to a certain type of game in the mid-2000s, they're leading to a different type of game right now.
Sure, yeah. And again, another part of the thought process or thought experiment that we're putting ourselves in is the idea of thinking about this potential AAA pop and how the bubble has grown too big and it's unsustainable, and these games are budgeting and the marketing and the buggy failures of things like Cyberpunk and Scarlet and Violet and these bigger games are becoming more prevalent now than they ever have been. And I think that there's an interesting future where once that has decreased and budgets have decreased and things have stabilized to a more healthy place, because I do believe that is at least possible. I don't know if it's going to happen, but I think it's possible. That we look back on the times like, oh, wasn't that funny? Wasn't it funny that this kept getting bigger and bigger and they didn't realize how deleterious?
Yes, you got it.
How deleterious that would the effects that would have on the industry and the people working on these games and all of that. I think there is a way to frame that in a nostalgically, like, slightly positive lens that my mind kind of goes to in terms of, like, I'm not saying this is necessarily fair, but like hand waving the issues with this generation. But I think the place that I do want to start with one more specific thing is something you kind of already mentioned. Is one of the things that was mentioned first in our Discord for this topic was the idea of games getting bigger and bigger, and that being something that is on a more open world basis, something that was very, very prevalent. Of course, it has always been prevalent up until this point. Games have never gotten on the large scale, on like AAA scale, smaller from the beginning of games history until now, and I think we're at a point where that might happen. But it was a exponential increase in scope and production value for these worlds, and that being the things like in Far Cry and Assassin's Creed and Skyrim and Fallout 4 and these games that all these big companies, especially Western ones, were making. That became the main trend. I mean, if you're getting a AAA game, it's going to have a big world, and there's going to be some check boxes, and even that happens with Sony's games and Microsoft's games and things like Spider-Man and Infamous and Horizon. And so it's a very, very widespread thing. Nintendo, other than Breath of the Wild, has largely been able to avoid that. And I think certainly to their benefit to help them stand out. But the idea that, and this is not something that I necessarily agree with, but I want to posit this as an element of future nostalgia that I think will become prevalent especially if we see the bubble pop and things do stabilize to a smaller and I would say healthier degree. But the idea that in 10 years, the idea that the biggest games on a scope level in terms of big maps and lots of checkboxes, the biggest games ever made came out in this period of time, and there being an excitement to that it's hard to feel in the moment because it is so aggressively commonplace and annoyingly so. And the idea of climbing up a tower and checking off another box and going on a trailing mission is so beaten like a fucking dead horse right now.
Sure.
But once that trend has disappeared, because it will over time eventually, maybe it's not even in the next 10 years, but at some point in time that will disappear, the idea that these giant games do have an appeal and a splendor to them that people, especially on a larger cultural level, will absolutely have nostalgia for in the future. And looking back and be like, wasn't it awesome that GTA 5 and Skyrim's map is so big, and then Far Cry 4 doubled the size of that map, and then Breath of the Wild came out, and games were so big and expansive, and there was so much to do, and it felt like you were getting the most for your money, as opposed to now, when things are smaller, and there's less to do, and the maps are tinier, and there's less of that scope. There is an appeal to that. It's not one that I necessarily personally gravitate towards, but I think that I can pretty safely assume that there will be a large subsect of people in the future that look back on what we would consider bloat now, but look back on that large scope of those games and be like, there was really something special there. When every big game coming out was bigger than the last, and it felt like you could sink all these time into these games.
Yeah, it'll be interesting because I think you're making a really good case for that, but I feel like you can also perhaps make the inverse case of the obviousness to which a lot of games were padded becoming more and more clear as you get games that maybe on the top level are more Spider-Man 2 in size and get smaller from there. There might actually be a reflection back and saying, man, it's really actually it's really that Spider-Man 2 size game that was great. Man, we were playing these games where as fucking 60, 70, 80, 90, 100 plus hours. Because it's interesting, right? We're in a niche of the games community where a game being 30 hours feels like a massive hurdle.
Yeah.
But for your average player right now in the moment, they're saying Spider-Man 2 is not long enough.
Yeah.
So it'll be interesting. It'll be interesting if in our more insulated space the scope becomes more appealing in hindsight, and if to a mainstream spot it's actually sort of like a mainstream space, it's a disillusionment with that scale. Because I do think there's still plenty of like a dollar per hour type of commentators and plenty of games fans to that extent right now. So that's a really interesting one because I feel like the jury's out, and I don't think that it's necessarily underappreciated. If at least in 2023, maybe if we were to go back to the time in which Fallout 4 and Witcher Wild Hunt are coming out, it would have been taken for granted the scale a little bit more. But I feel like in an era of Spider-Man and an era of beating Jedi Survivor and beating mainlining that game in 15 hours or whatever you can do it in, I feel like people are starting to realize, oh man, I did want that. Some people are starting to realize I did.
Very interesting point. Yeah,
I already wanted that scope back.
Another interesting example is Starfield Mainline is less than 20 hours. I mean, I beat that game in around 20 hours, and there are certainly people. Of course, that is a very optional thing, but mainlining that game is not the, 35, 40-hour task that Witcher 3 was. It is about half that size, and for me, thank you Bethesda.
Cyberpunk's that long too.
But yeah, we are reaching that point. I didn't really think of it from that angle because I do think that there still is that spectacle that people are looking for in the scope of games, and we're on the precipice of GTA 6, and then we'll see how big that map is in comparison, and maybe it's actually not bigger than Los Santos was in GTA 5. Maybe it's just more densely populated with things to do and care in the map design. But there is an appeal to scope and just fucking literally being big, and that either way I can see people looking back on with fond eyes, even though it is beaten into the fucking ground now. It's like every fucking game does that. God damn it.
Yeah, I've been thinking about another one, and this is something that I think we're already starting to realize we maybe took for granted a little bit, which is the notion of a multiplayer game that has a defined and coherent art direction and ethos.
Okay, sure.
Which is largely gone already. And what I mean to say is there have always been games with crossover characters and hidden characters and lockable shit. Soul Calibur had a different hidden character on each platform. Yeah. Tony Hawk's Pro Skater, he could shred around as Darth Maul, right? This stuff has always been there.
What a wild pick, by the way.
Yeah, it is. Pretty badass, I'll be honest with you. But we're now in an era where that notion has become the premise of a lot of games. Yeah. Fortnite is obviously the I'll use the neutral word of largest example of this. But I was seeing somebody talking about on Twitter, obviously we're getting Dune characters in Call of Duty. You look at a Call of Duty Warzone battle against Godzilla, and the game is frankly unrecognizable as Call of Duty in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
Or even
Mortal
Kombat. The other example this person was giving on Twitter is Master Chief is in Rainbow Six Siege, which is...
I didn't even know that.
Yeah, which is really fucking weird.
Also something that someone else brought up in our server, and this gets a point we're going to specifically read out, but leads into this point of Joker from Persona 5 is in fucking 40 different video games. Just as a skin, as a fucking... I don't even know. I've never played any of these games that have him as a crossover character, but very prevalent thing.
Yeah, I mean, it's becoming very obvious that people will pay a lot of money for skins you have to spend, I think it's something like $20 on premium currency to get the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles costumes in Street Fighter 6 for like your creative fighter. There's a clear, and this is definitely more of this time than where the generation began, when Destiny is very, very pure in its visual direction, and
Sure.
Call of Duty was too, and Battlefield and everything, right? Where it's not necessarily about it's about those games taking themselves more seriously, but it's about those games more carefully cultivating a world of their own. Whereas the sort of multiversal appeal is now what a lot of people are, or a lot of developers are sort of shoehorning into their games, which
Sure. Yeah. Yeah.
something you were talking about is something we can discuss of a jumping in point to maybe in 10 years people will look back with a nostalgia and a fondness on these big multiverse type crossovers. But frankly, I think in our world of IP, I think it will only become more and more the norm personally. But what we do already see disappearing is sort of that insulated and cohesive art direction for a lot of multiplayer games.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I am relatively limited on the experience that I have playing games that not only initially had cohesive design, but now have horse shit from other IPs coming out the wazoo. I just simply do not play those games, at least primarily enough to feel the impact of that, but I'm definitely aware. Every time I turn on fucking Twitter every morning, there's some other game that has announced some other character from some movie or some other game from some other company, and that's just the thing that happens. And it is so commonplace that it's kind of in one ear out the other to me. Like, I'm sure I read that Master Chief was in Rainbow Six. I'm sure that showed up one day, and 2 or 3 people I know tweeted about it, and you might have even been one of them, but I totally forgot about it because it is such a commonplace thing that I read the future projection of this as more of a bubble that will pop quicker than maybe you do, because I see that we have reached basically the point of saturation where it is difficult to imagine other elements where you can do that crossover. The games that can do it and do it a lot, and there has to be a certain point where you can't add anything new, or frankly, and I think this is the more realistic thought process in my mind for how things will progress, where that appeal is so saturated where it's no longer an appeal. And that is where I feel this generation, starting with things like Fortnite, but even you can say Smash Ultimate featuring so many third-party characters, or Mortal Kombat reaching out to other IP for its last couple games, or Injustice, where I read this whole situation in a much less cynical light, where the people that this appeals to love that this happens. They love that they can play as fucking Paul Atreides in like half the games they play, and that there's a crossover event with Godzilla and Galactus and all this nonsense. That is very, very appealing to them, and it is very successful for all of these fan bases to be able to jump into Mortal Kombat as Omni-Man or whatever. And Mortal Kombat's kind of its own thing, but and fighting game crossover characters, that's certainly
that's the longer tradition of that.
But I read this in the less cynical light of where I think the mindset of the people that this is marketed towards will be in 20 years or 10 years. And I don't count myself among those people. I'm mostly arguing for a general sense of nostalgia in 10 years, not from a very an internal subjective perspective, but to where in 10 years, once that bubble, as I assume, has popped and we can't really get much more, and it starts to peter out, and people are like, oh, it's too much. We've gotten enough of it. You can't really add any more in 10 years from now, and it's not as prevalent. People will look back at Fortnite having a Galactus event and there being the next reveal of Solid Snake and Peter Griffin showing up on Twitter on one morning as a time when there was an excitement in the air. Anything could happen. And any IP, any character from any of your favorite things could show up again. It doesn't matter how long that their last time their movie came out. It doesn't matter if it doesn't make any sense. They're going to find a way to do it. And I do think that there is, again, much less cynically, but I do think that there is a magic to that once it is gone, people will absolutely long for and reflect on in a positive light, because to the people that care about it, it's what draws them into games. And and I just think that I don't give a shit about it personally, but I do think that it will be looked back on fondly, especially once it is gone, because it is such an interesting and exciting and appealing thing to the people that do care about it.
Yeah, this is again another example like the open world thing where it'll be a cool. It's such a interesting thing to speculate and a cool conversation starter because I think you can also perhaps think that people are going to look back and be like, wasn't it tacky that this happened?
Oh, certainly possible. Yeah, absolutely.
But I mean, you can already see on Twitter some people being like, "Man, wasn't it so cool that Travis Scott did a concert in Fortnite, and I got to go to the Travis Scott Fortnite concert."
Yeah.
Not me personally. The I'm talking about this person, which is maybe the only Fortnite thing I've ever felt any FOMO about ever, by the way. But this is I think partially where the taking myself out of it comes into it, the gratitude portion comes into it, but also my disagreement with you philosophically about where like a multiverse shared world thing like this is gonna go. I only think it's gonna get bigger and bigger and bigger. It's what fucking Facebook wants you to do in their meta space or whatever. Like everybody wants this big IP collision. Everyone wants to make Ready Player One real, and we're getting closer and closer and closer to that. So I don't think it's gonna stop. But through some lenses, sure, I think it's exciting that it's happening, right? I think that I'm not a Fortnite fan.
Yeah.
I'm very happy that a lot of people love Fortnite, and I think that it's a massive achievement. And and the reality might be, the nostalgic thing looking back might be that there is no other game like Fortnite because Fortnite continues to dominate in this space. Yeah. It continues, as we're seeing with a lot of live service games, continuing to edge out any new competition. So maybe people will be nostalgic for when a game could stand up to something like Fortnite before, like Facebook, it gets so big that, fuck it, maybe you get a competitor, maybe you get two competitors, but
yeah,
they got that space locked down. So I think that's an interesting thing to consider. I think that the people who look back and say, actually, no, it was really fucking tacky when Peter Griffin got redesigned to be a big muscle man and got put into Fortnite. There's a lot of different ways you can think about it, because what business does Paul Atreides really have in Call of Duty?
Yeah, of course.
And so,
well, you don't know. Have you asked him?
That's the. I mean, here's the thing. Timothy Chalamet.
People always ask what business Paul Atreides has in Call of Duty. They don't ever ask how business Paul Atreides has in Call of Duty.
Timothy Chalamet belongs in Call of Duty. Let's say that.
Sure. Yeah.
I think that a Timothy Chalamet skin as Timothy Chalamet operator in Warzone makes a lot more sense than a Paul Atreides operator in Warzone. But yeah, I think that's an interesting point.
Yeah. Here's the bucket I put myself into when it comes to future projecting these things. Is I think in a more cynical light, I view all of these trends as something that certainly may continue to grow, but all inevitably have an end. And that is kind of the shoes that I put myself into. Is maybe it's not 10 years from now. It certainly might not be. Yeah. But there will reach a point where this multiverse thing is not popular. It feels like it will continue forever for now because it's the big thing. But it is fair enough. Literally not possible for it to continue forever. Every trend has a beginning, an arc, and an end. It will peter off at some point. The MCU was the biggest thing ever we thought was going to continue forever, and it seems to be losing momentum now. Genres and ideas and companies expand and contract over time, and so I put myself in the shoes of maybe it isn't 10 years from now. I can certainly concede that, but once the multiverse bubble has popped and these IP crossover things are not the norm anymore, I do think they will be looked back on fondly. But I also agree that there's a totally other perspective. It's like it was fucking stupid. Like it robbed that generation's multiplayer games of their own identity, and now we just think of them as this fucking amorphous blob of nonsense. So no, absolutely. I think that both are interestingly thought provoking. Though at the moment I'm arguing for the perspective outside of my own. Sure. I'm arguing for the perspective of nostalgia for the people that do care about this, which is neither of us. So I think I'm right. Let's put it that way.
Here's another one.
Okay.
This one that we definitely take for granted. Buying games.
Sure.
I think that's a big one. I think buying physical games is another one.
Yeah.
Now, there will always be a market for physical games. There's a market for every single, with the exception of like fucking HD DVD and Laserdisc and some things.
Some people want Laserdiscs.
Some people probably do want Laserdiscs, but you can go to a store right now, and you can go to a specialty retailer online, and you can buy, as we do, plenty of film on physical media. Cassettes are having something of a comeback in the music space right now.
For real?
Yeah.
That's bizarre.
Yeah, you can get these really nice high-end, again, from boutique retailers, although I think Sony also makes a nice one, cassette players for yourself. There will always be a space for physical media, and there will always be a space for purchasing your media. J. Cole was just talking about, is a big rapper, was just talking on a podcast kind of funnily about how he just got a #1 song with Drake, and he was talking about how, man, we got that #1 because a lot of our fans are buying first-person shooter as digital singles on iTunes. And he said, I don't know who all you guys are. I don't know who's out here still buying digital singles on iTunes, but I love you guys.
Yeah.
So there will always be a space to buy your games. But I think we would also be kidding ourselves if we looked at where we were right now and said that the inevitability is not that we just, fork over a subscription to get all of our games. Now, that will obviously have a very, very clear effect on game design and everything. That's a different conversation to have. Mm-hmm. I think we will certainly look back in 10 years, maybe even less than 10 years, to the time when you're going and you're putting down that full chunk of change, full $60 on $70 on your game.
Yeah.
It's not going to be the case, I don't think. Yep. So that's a really compelling one to me. The notion of the ways we actually acquire our games being fundamentally different. Think about the people who have nostalgia for not only this physical media that we collect, but also the nostalgia for the experience of going to a Blockbuster or anything. It's just not going to be around for games, I don't think.
Totally. Yeah, and I think that in my mind is the clearest place that I see people our age having a very strong nostalgia for this point in time, where even though it is continually dropping off, basically every big game gets a physical release. Yeah. You can go into stores, and basically all the big stores still sell games. We're watching them, the bigger stores, not sell movies anymore physically, which kind of shows you how that market is dropping off and becoming more of a niche thing. But we haven't reached that point for games yet, but it's absolutely coming. It is a fucking inevitable wall that will come in the future. And what I think makes me most interested to see for the future is, while I think I agree there will always be that boutique Lost and Cult-esque appeal of the hardcore wanting to recreate that experience.
Yeah.
I wonder if that will be hampered in any way by the fact that there may not be consoles that accept physical media in the future. And so then, is there a hardware designer boutique thing like a limited run games that makes a disc drive that they print the games for, and you buy their disc drive that you plug into your fucking PS7, and then you can play a physical game on it.
Yeah.
But does any official SKU of the PS7 have a disc drive in it? Does Sony ever publish their games physically at that point in time? Do they realize that they can get more out of their user base by just having it as a subscription and having the monetization be different? That is something that I think is very fascinating and is an element of our personal connection to this era of games that we absolutely, I think you said it very well, take for granted. I mean, I go to Best Buy basically every time there's a new game, and I walk in the store, and I've already pre-ordered it, but I grab my thing, and I like to take a picture of me holding it in my car as I go back, and then cracking it open, and getting the points off my Switch card when I put it in the thing, and putting it on my shelf and looking at the box art and all that. That's something I have a massive, massive connection to. And I can and will absolutely see myself in 10, 15 years being like, damn, that was a very, very special point in my life where I was able to do this, and the industry has changed, and from my perspective it will be for the worse because I'm not able to recreate that special feeling that I had when I was 23 years old. But I think that's probably the strongest element of this generation, nostalgia-wise, that I will have, because it is something that is pervasive for me, and I find myself wanting to recreate that experience as often as I can, to the point where I'm a little bit disappointed when I split the cost of Spider-Man 2 with Tanner, and I don't get to have a physical copy of Spider-Man 2, and I don't own Miles Morales because he bought the digital copy and he didn't have a PS5 with a disc, so I missed my chance to have that opening day, PS5 launch day, going to the store and getting a copy of Miles Morales on disc. I missed that experience, and I think it is something that I can get over, frankly, but it is something I will always have like a deep personal connection to, like, damn.
Yeah.
It was something that mattered to me, and it's going to be gone. I'm not as cynical to be like, oh, that's going to be like, the death of the industry or whatever, or it's going to be like a categorically worse thing. But on a very subjective level, it's going to be something I miss once it goes away.
Yeah, I think I don't buy most of my games physically.
No, basically never.
I just I'm lazy.
But you also are under the pretense of, I can't upgrade my internal storage on my consoles because that's a fucking hassle. So what are you going to do at some point? You piece of shit.
Rock and hard place for sure. But this is where it gets really interesting for me personally, right? Part of it is convenience.
Yeah.
But also, I want to do a bit of prop example here. Give me a second.
Okay.
Just give me a second.
What's that thing on the floor? I thought it was Olivia from Paper Mario: The Origami King. But it looks like maybe a bag of cat treats, or... Because, okay, I know you guys are looking at the same thing I am. It's this yellow thing on the floor. It looks like a snack bag that has the plastic, like, you have a little bit where you tear it, and it's just hanging on by a little bit on the end. Very, very interesting. I don't think it's Olivia, though. Okay.
I've grabbed a couple things here.
Sure.
Because I think, again, part of the intrigue of this conversation is that we're also discussing how people will be sad that things they liked are going to be gone, right? Mm-hmm. That's intrinsic to this conversation.
That's the point of nostalgia.
But this is something else I want to raise, right? So I grabbed a couple things off my shelf.
That's what the point of the disc is.
Point of the disc is. I got a couple physical games here. I just kind of grabbed them at random, frankly. I got Bayonetta 3 physically on Switch, Dead Space physically on PS5, which I think is actually my only physical PS5 game. Mm-hmm. And then I have here two Blu-ray. I have Parasite Criterion. My light's fucking it up. It looks really nice in person. And then this After Sun. To me, these are so much nicer than these.
Yeah.
Again, part of my disinterest in physical is convenience. I like the convenience of digital, but also to me, this is lame-o fucking mass market horse shit packaging.
Yeah.
Like I like the art. I think it's fine, but half the back of the box is complete nonsense, warnings, bullshit, whatever is on the back of the box.
Yeah.
These are beautiful collector's pieces. And I think to kind of bring a bit of hope into the conversation, when games become, on a physical level, a more boutique item, and I can get a copy of, I don't know, insert whatever big game it's going to come out in 5 years I'm excited about, on a piece of physical media that looks like this, and I want to display, well, that'll be cool.
Sure.
There will be this...
because there will be a point where the value becomes offering something on a physical form that cannot be replicated in the same way on a digital storefront, or at least if it not that it can't, but that it isn't. Because the point of Criterion releases is that they offer you the bonus features and the physical little not handwritten, but like typed out essay at the little manual and all that, that you can't get digitally. You can't get all these special features because they're only available on the Criterion disc, and we haven't reached the point where, especially because there aren't as many third-party publishers of physical games as there are for these bigger companies for films, but where someone like Limited Run or Super Rare Games, you can imagine them in 10 years once Sony's no longer putting out their games, teaming up with them and putting out the physical copy of the final Spider-Man game that never got a physical release, that has hours of interviews with the developers and behind the scenes bonus features, or even something like you can imagine The Last of Us 2 remastered being something that is released on a physical version, or at least an equivalent of it, that has all that stuff on the disc that you can't get on just by downloading it anymore. And so that there's definitely a intrigue and a value in that as games reach the point that movies have now, because you said that we are the ones that are buying physical movies. I don't give a fuck. I frankly, don't tell anyone. I don't even pay for most of the movies I watch. Don't.
Yeah.
I know if you talk to me, you'd never know that. But I'm even at that point with films where it doesn't really matter to me. I mean, I used to collect Criterions, but
Yeah.
the money's not worth it anymore for me. So it'll definitely be cool to see what form physical media takes in terms of offering special and unique and compelling content to appeal to the people that are interested in that niche market in 10, 15 years.
Yeah, I think just making a beautiful object that you want to have because you love the game.
You telling me Dead Space on PS5 is not a beautiful object?
No. It's just because the other thing for me, and actually I'm not going to say because it's just going to derail the conversation.
Okay.
It'd be about why I buy games digitally. It's not important to the conversation, but I think that it is an important dimension of the conversation to consider what the replacement will be, and the fact that maybe that replacement won't be so bad. And even in the case of, sure, maybe we're going to lose these large open worlds, but what we're going to get in their place are very neatly curated, tight, linear directed
better games.
I agree with you. You want to read something from the community?
Absolutely, I do. Let's read. Here's an interesting kind of different perspective to take this. From our friend Nishquick in the server says, future nostalgia to me will be Discord voice chats while playing any game. Just reacting to what's happening while streaming the game to my friends will always be fun. Also, hearing their reactions to games I have played and they're playing for the first time is always great. What I miss... Oh, actually, do you want to talk about this a little bit? Because I think this is an interesting point of current culture. Though, actually, here's what's interesting about this. So, I agree, Nishquick. In 10, 15 years, I will have nostalgia looking back of playing games online and hanging out on Discord voice chats. And more likely than not, the reason that I'm not doing that anymore is because I'll be a fucking adult where that won't be as big a part of my schedule in 15 years as it is now. But this is an element that, unlike the things that I have talked about, I don't see going away in the same way. It might shift to where it's a fucking VR thing. It's a Ready Player One style headset, whatever. But there will always be some way to talk online or whatever the successor to online is with your friends and hear their voices and share games with them. So that is not a trend that I see ending and looking back on fondly. But the memories absolutely are something to have nostalgia for. The current moment, these games, with Discord in particular, because Discord's not going to be around forever. I mean, I have nostalgia for talking to my friends on fucking TeamSpeak and Skype, which are services I don't use anymore. But this is a different kind of nostalgia because it will still be replicable, but your moment in your life will have changed so much that you won't be able to recreate that. But people will.
Yeah, I mean, this is just... To me, this is more kind of stock standard nostalgia and things changing with the time. This is different. Kind of what we're talking about, kind of in part, is sort of cause and effect to how game design and things will change, right? But this is really no different than like my mom in being nostalgic about like calling her friends on a landline, right? I mean, it's But I think the other thing is
still call her friends.
Yeah, and it's like. Okay, maybe Discord. Maybe Wumpus will do Discord in because now everyone hates Wumpus. You should have already hated Wumpus, but if you do now, good. Okay, Discord will be replaced by something that's basically the same.
I mean, actually, it's similar to when you hear people talk about the nostalgia they have for like early internet stuff, like fucking like IM boards and fucking pre-Facebook social media stuff. It's like. Well, they've just been replaced by superior versions. It's just something that was in your life that you miss.
Yeah, like if you showed me the fucking Kik Messenger app right now, I'd be a little nostalgic.
Dog. I spent a lot of time on there talking to people I didn't know.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. Everybody did. But like, what we have now is better than Kik, right? Yeah, so I just view that.
Kik is still kicking. I'm pretty sure the app still exists.
I think it's just used for like bad things at this point.
It always was.
Yeah. To be honest with you, the only thing I was thinking about when you were reading that comment was Nish be nimble, Nish be quick, Nish run up the candlestick.
Fair enough.
Just to be honest with you.
Nishwick's second part, I think, does... Well, actually, I haven't read it yet, but I think it... I'm doing a little future nostalgia here. I think it appeals more to what we're talking about.
Sure.
What I miss is going over to a friend's house to play games. I did this a lot in elementary school. Okay, actually, no, this is basically the same as you can still go over to your friend's house to play games. You just don't anymore.
No, this to me though is closer to the heart of the conversation. Though.
Okay, do you want me to finish the thing then?
Sure. I mean, I'm already running on the idea, so you finish reading.
I did this a lot in elementary school and middle school with Mario games, Mario Kart, Smash, etc. But even had some friends come to my house to try out Zelda games I had. But it's hard to do that now since couch co-op isn't as fun as it used to be, and the friends I visit now don't usually have the same taste in games as I do anymore.
Yeah, I mean, this is maybe one of the great historical illustrations of this conversation.
Sure.
The shift to online play in the 7th generation left what was seemingly never going to be left in the past, the notion of local multiplayer, sort of in it. I mean, Absolutely. There were franchises that always maintained it. Of course, Nintendo built a lot of the reputation N64 and post N64 on local multiplayer, but even my beloved Halo, right, had split screen the entire time. They never let that go away. Call of Duty continued to have split screen. The Lego games continued to be there, right? There was always, there was always a local multiplayer spirit, but there's no doubt that it was a lot. It was slimmed down, by the prevalence of online and the shift to online, and that only continues. And the point is ultimately that the ways we play together online are changing.
Yep. And
Fortnite is actually an example of how Fortnite and games like it, other live services, are changing what it meant to play online before. I mean, you think about the Last of Us factions online that just got canceled. The original Last of Us factions is just a multiplayer mode, and so you met your friends online to play a mode on your game Last of Us. You booted up your copy of Last of Us, and there was a multiplayer mode. Naughty Dog realized, hey, look, we would need to be a fundamentally different company to support the modern expectations of multiplayer live service. Round-based, non-updated, sort of insular multiplayer is not that popular anymore.
No, absolutely not.
Everybody wants to have a battle pass. Everybody wants you to be playing for months. Everybody wants to be your next Destiny. And again, this is an economic thing. They want to extract as much money out of these games as they can because they cost a fucking arm and a leg to make. Yeah. But it's just another illustration of the fact that as tech changes, these design priorities change, as there's a financial imperative of these games change, the design changes. And so I think we will, and it's not far from my point about art direction in multiplayer games before. There will be a point when maybe we're nostalgic even for a round-based multiplayer game as recent as Overwatch. Overwatch has no hub where you run around as a little avatar as you wait for your match to start. Most games have that now. Splatoon has that. Street Fighter has that. Most multiplayer games are live service. You're fucking jumping around listening to Travis Scott. Again, the only time I wish I had ever been playing Fortnite. And I think that'll become more of the norm. And we'll realize, man, these round-based multiplayer games that are less life-intensive are kind of not that popular anymore.
Yeah. I mean, I don't have enough experience with multiplayer games with a personal connection to them to where I feel any particular way about any of this. Frankly, I continue to play as much games in person with my friends as I ever did.
Yeah.
Is about once every week or 2 weeks, my friends would come over when I was in middle school or high school, and we'd play some Smash or whatever. It basically still happens. Yeah. We pop into Street Fighter 6 or my friends watch me play Metal Gear. Yeah. I'm at the point in my life where that has not changed enough to me. Like, man, back there. But I absolutely will. I cannot fathom in 10 years me not looking back at the times I spent playing Tears of the Kingdom with my friends on the couch, and we were like, oh no, try this, try that, try this. If I stick this to that thing, that's going to be something I look back on with incredibly fond memories. But again, the point of my perspective on this is more like, it's not that I couldn't do that in 10 years, but I probably won't because I'll be a fucking adult and I won't live in the same house as my friends, and we won't be constantly going over to each other's house multiple times a week like we still are. So I'm enjoying what I've got while it lasts. But I will absolutely be nostalgic for it.
Yeah.
Let's see. Brogan chatting. He's a living end, you know what I'm saying? Bro's comment here says, by 2013, I was an adult and into college. I think what's changed for the better and won't be sustainable into the future are these big budget titles that attempt live services, but more importantly, it's large-scale service packages like Game Pass. I think Game Pass is both a harmful and beautiful thing, and it's not going to last the way it is. Nintendo's online also radically changes because they feel both outdated on an entirely separate path from other business models. I missed Virtual Console when it went away. I will surely miss the Switch services when they go. Future nostalgia is when you're an adult. When you're an adult, mostly becomes "quote unquote" that was neat, rather than profoundly defining memories, especially with how impersonal the industry is when we aren't looking at independent titles.
Yeah, I mean this is just a difference of opinion thing, right? I mean Game Pass. I mean, I am of the personal belief that Game Pass is nowhere near a sustainable product.
I think most people are.
Yeah.
I think that's pretty much indisputable.
Yeah, I mean, you got a lot of people that'll tell you Game Pass is the future.
Yeah.
The amendment I would make is that I think subscription services are the future.
I would agree with that. Yeah.
Not Game Pass.
Yeah.
I think about Halo a lot, as you know, but I often think about the economics of just Halo Infinite alone.
Yeah.
And the fact that Game Pass. Let's put it this way: if I haven't bought a copy of Halo Infinite, who was buying copies of Halo Infinite? Right.
No, absolutely. Well, I think what's interesting about this Game Pass, and again, kind of what we take for granted and will look back on fondly, is I agree. Game Pass won't last in this regard. There'll be some analog for it. I think there will always be some form of subscription service for games, and that's true for basically every form of media now. And then that's one I have a tough time see changing. I don't think it's impossible that it won't change, or there will be some other form of purchasing that ends up replacing it in the future. But I think what we take for granted now and will look back on fondly is Game Pass and the subscription service as they stand today. The idea that you can pay, Microsoft loves to do this, but you can pay $1 for a month of Game Pass, or sometimes like 3 months if you find the right thing, and you can play every game they've ever published for those 3 months, and plus most of the things that a bunch of other older things and things that a third party and indies make, and that is a incredibly special thing. I obviously think there is some harm to it, but that can't last forever. And so when we look back and be like, do you remember the first 5 years that Game Pass existed, and every new Microsoft title was coming to it, and big third-party releases were coming to it, and you could pick up like half the indies you wanted just by paying for this thing that was under the cost of a single game for a month? We're gonna be looking back and be like, we didn't know what we had. Oh my God, that was so great. Like, oh, look how much worse things are now with the whatever revamped version it is. And I think that's something that I try to have a little bit of like reverence for. Though it's like, it is very cool that this happens, and it can't last forever. So enjoy it while it lasts.
Yeah, I mean, my feeling about Game Pass, right, is
What do you think, Paul?
Paul doesn't have any thoughts about anything.
Paul doesn't have Game Pass?
Paul doesn't have Game Pass.
Maybe Paul was the one person that bought Halo Infinite.
Paul doesn't have thumbs. He couldn't have bought Halo Infinite.
Oh, that's a good point.
He would have had to put the game cartridge into it. He would have had to put the game case in his mouth and carry it to the store, but he can't drive. He couldn't find his way to a store to buy a physical copy of Halo Infinite.
Sure.
I mean, I pay what is Game Pass Ultimate right now? $16 or something. It's under $20. Yeah. That feels like fucking robbery to me, right? I mean, the thing about Game Pass is that it kind of feels like I'm getting away with something I shouldn't be getting away with, right? Yeah. And I'm not even like trying to stack the $1 deals or whatever. I am the highest tier Game Pass user you can be, as Microsoft intended. I'm not using any loopholes.
Why do you pay for Ultimate? You don't need Ultimate.
Because Ultimate also comes with online play.
Oh wait. What's the one that bundles that with PC? Because you don't need the one that comes with PC.
Well, no, I don't think there's a choice. I think I have to.
Also, no, I have the one that has online but not PC.
Oh well, I don't know then. I thought I had to have it.
Okay.
I did play Combat Evolved recently over at xCloud, so I guess I got some use out of it.
Oh, I think that also the bigger one.
I'll investigate though, because if I don't have to use Ultimate, I won't.
I think there's one that's like $3 less that you don't need. That you
Oh,
can
okay.
be paying.
Then I'll investigate that. But the point is, this is another thing where maybe it's just a personal difference, but I don't know if I'll look back fondly on the fact that I was able to get Game Pass for what it is, when I do feel like it is in a lot of ways so objectively destructive to the economics of games. Mm-hmm. My opinion of Game Pass right now in 2023 is it is such a good deal that I would be foolish to cancel as a consumer that has a, I'm 22, I don't have a ton of money. It would be foolish of me not to use Game Pass.
Yeah.
But also, Game Pass is like a destructive force, in my opinion. So this is another thing where I'll have to really sort out my feelings in 10 years of maybe it's, it wasn't that great when I didn't have to buy all these Xbox games for full price each. Mm-hmm. But it also might be, man, I ended up spending several years subscribed to a service that was that marked the beginning of the end of how games are traditionally budgeted and designed and marketed and released. And that's why this is such an interesting generation in particular to use this experiment on, because we're at such a precipice of change, I feel. Mm-hmm. And Paul is on the precipice of changing rooms, so I got to open the door. You keep talking. He can't open doors. He can't.
Yeah, but what's the word? The threshold. He's on the threshold, because literally.
He's just
that's like the border of a door, correct?
Yeah, usually when you're talking about like carrying somebody across the threshold, it's usually like you're carrying your wife across the threshold as you get married.
Yeah. Or me. Maybe you're carrying me. Hypothetically.
In Minecraft. Do you have any more comments?
Yeah, well, Bro has a second part, and here's more of a genre thing, which we haven't really covered as much. I guess we covered open worlds earlier, but he says, roguelike elements will be a trend many will miss. IMO for other people. There will likely be a return to a more directed design approach, but at this point, roguelike design is used as a formula to experience content rather than encourage mastery of complex systems. Okay, he's divulging into his opinions on roguelikes, but I think the idea that genre and design trends are something that ebb and flow and gain popularity, and people put all their money into doing this, and it feels like it oversaturates the market, and then it disappears over time. I think roguelikes are a great example of this, and I think that things like hero shooters are something, or battle royale games, that's not going to be popular forever. These are all genre trends that are probably at their peaks right now. Them hero shooters might have been a few years ago, but battle royale games and roguelike games, everyone and their fucking mother is making them. The jokes in the industry, you watch a Summer Game Fest, you watch Nintendo
Card
Direct,
battling, farming, roguelike.
You're getting some amalgamation of all these fucking buzzword design terms.
Souls-like.
But none of these will be. They'll exist. Someone will be making roguelikes and battle royale games and Souls-likes forever. But they won't be as popular in 10 years. And I think that there absolutely is a looking back and being like, man, remember the battle royale genre was the big thing? Wasn't that either exciting and or kind of quaint looking back on it? It was kind of dumb that everyone was doing that. But there's absolutely a genre nostalgia that once this is passed, there'll be nostalgia for it.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with the point. I don't think I agree with the example. Sure. I don't think roguelites... I think roguelites are only just going to continue to get more popular. Okay. On a AAA level.
Okay.
Sure. In this moment, we are seeing AAA's, particularly Sony teams, turn out these roguelites very quickly. Yeah. I've heard, by the way, that this God of War one is fucking awesome.
That's all I've heard about it, yeah.
And I'm actually thinking about downloading it. What's the game called? Ragnarok. So and the expansion's Valhalla. Because apparently you can just launch it from the main menu, and I can just play Valhalla without playing. They're like, oh, you should play Ragnarok.
But you don't even like God of War's gameplay.
Well, my problem with God, frankly, the most recent time I tried playing God of War, I liked the gameplay.
Oh, okay. Sure.
I just sort of couldn't take literally anything else about the game.
Sure.
So if I could just play that, I actually might download it tonight and just try it tomorrow and just see.
Could be interesting. I'm certainly not gonna play it, so that'll make one of us.
But
God of War Ragnarok by 6 favorite game of all time. I'm not fucking playing that.
God of War Ragnarok, Last of Us Part 2, No Return, Splatoon 3, Side Order, Returnal. But the reason I didn't point out Returnal in particular is because these three are illustrations of how roguelite is being used now by AAA to repurpose game assets and mechanics to create repeatable experiences. I guess Splatoon 3 Side Order is not a great example here because obviously that game is infinitely repeatable in multiplayer, but taking something like Ragnarok from a game you play once and beat in 20, 25 hours or whatever and move on from to a game that you keep running, and suddenly Sony Santa Monica, probably a small portion of their team was able to work to go deploy this mode. Frankly, if I was them, I would have charged $19.99 for it.
And they would have, and people would have been really fucking happy with it.
Yeah, and I don't actually know why, particularly Sony didn't charge $19.95 for this. But $19.95, what fucking shipping and handling? What am I, QVC channel? I don't know why I said 95, but I
why
think,
is it 95 as opposed to 99 for shipping?
I think
Is it still like that? I have not watched a commercial for shipping something since I was fucking 9. So I have no idea.
The last time I really remember watching QVC was they were showing Wii Sports Resort on QVC.
What's QVC?
QVC, I forget what it stands for, but QVC was like the 24/7 like channel where people demonstrate products and you can buy them from TV.
And you watched that?
It would sometimes just be on in our house.
What the fuck's wrong with your family?
It's no different than like...
Do you just love being marketed to?
It's... Well,
please show me products so I can consume.
I mean, in hindsight, that's what it was.
Yeah.
But the point about roguelite is that this is, I think, being identified by AAA as a way to extract more value out of their games.
Absolutely.
And I think that the next generation of titles, or they'll put it this way, the next 10 years of games on a AAA level is going to be defined by how much value can we extract for the lowest input on a resources level.
Yeah, well, that's very interesting. Yeah.
So I don't think roguelite in particular is going away.
Sure.
But even again, I am talking about multiplayer a lot today, which is weird because I don't even play a ton of multiplayer. But you know, like TDM, Team Deathmatch, has largely been replaced by Battle Royale as like the default way to play. Even COD, right? You can of course you can still play Team Deathmatch in Call of Duty, but everybody's up in Warzone's business, right? That in a lot of ways, you're right. It became the default multiplayer mode for a while, and still is. So I think that's a good point. I just disagree with roguelite in particular.
Sure. Yeah. And that's an interesting point. Something I mean, we're so on the precipice of it that I hadn't even thought about the idea that could become something that's more prevalent. But I mean, you're obviously right. Within a fucking month, we will have had the two biggest Sony games make fucking roguelike modes.
Yeah.
And also maybe fucking side order will release within that time frame as well. Who knows?
God, I would love that.
We have Murph and Adam as well here.
Sure.
Murph says, when I think of the 2010s, I think of viral games. It was a time these bite-sized horror games designed not so much to be played, but to watch other people play. From these, we got mascot horror like Slender, Five Nights at Freddy's, and so on. The 2010s was the first time I felt like YouTubers had a sway over the market. And then he also goes on to mention what he uses refers to as wiki games like Terraria, Minecraft, Daisy, Rust, being something, that exploded in popularity over the course of the last decade. And he says, and don't get me wrong, a lot of the Slender and Minecraft wannabes of the 2010s were trash, but it was our trash, secret and special. We weren't playing the hot new AAA game we were playing, parentheses, at the time, an obscure indie game that existed on the periphery of popular discourse until the bubble burst and everyone knew about it. I remember when it was shocking to find out that Minecraft got its first merchandise, and now it feels like it's a given that any viral hit will get a physical merch. Not to say that these two types of games are necessarily gone. Minecraft is just as popular as it was a decade ago, and we're still inundated with mascot horror. Hell, the recent popular Lethal Company is an example of both, but there's something less electric about all of it. I don't know, maybe I'm just nostalgic and / or older now. I think that is a combination of the two, and I think both are interesting to discuss.
I mean, I think he's just nostalgic for when Slender was new.
Sure. Well, I think the objective reality is that these games become popular and they immediately hit the mainstream and get their fucking merchandise and stuff.
Yeah.
Like, there wasn't Five Nights at Freddy's plushies 2 years after that game came out, but now fucking Poppy Playtime is like a year old, and I every time I go to the fucking mall, I see that dumb blue guy hanging on the like the cheapo rack.
I was literally going to talk about Poppy Playtime. That's very
Yeah.
bizarre.
Because that's it. It's things like that and Among
Yeah.
Us and fucking Siren Head and like these are things that are for the generation below us. These are not things that we were on the precipice of being exposed to and watching content for. But I was there for Five Nights at Freddy's. I had those games I played them on my iTouch. I watched the explained videos. I drew fan art of Five Nights at Freddy's. And Undertale and Overwatch and all these things, like the viral sensations of some of these games or things even just a little bit before my time, like in terms of when I got into things like Gary's Mod and Happy Wheels and Goat Simulator. Like the idea that in this last generation of games, this last decade, we have seen the indie game viral hit become something that happens multiple times a year, and it felt very much more like a fresh and exciting thing back then, especially with those games, because they were the first ones to do it. And no game had hit the mainstream on a small scale and shared through viral marketing like Five Nights at Freddy's had. And I just saw the movie of it a couple months ago. But viral games that hit the mainstream are absolutely still a thing. That's how Trombone Champ and as you said, Lethal Company and like games like that still absolutely come out all the time. But there was a difference in how they were perceived by the mainstream. But I think that it's reached a point where it's less special for sure, but to where the appeal of those games are for people that aren't us. It is the fact that we've never played. I don't even think I know anyone who's played a Poppy Playtime. It's not even called that, I don't think. I can't remember. But millions of kids have, and that's the thing that they tell their friends on, and they watch the YouTube videos about. Like they still exist. They absolutely still exist.
I think this is an apt comment, and that this is definitely a new trend of this era, because you couldn't have been Slenderman 5 years earlier because there was
It's
not.
just called Slender, by the way.
Yeah.
Slender, the 8 pages?
Yeah,
6
missing
pages?
something like that. It doesn't
There's a
fucking
number.
matter. Yeah. Because before you could not have. There was not PewDiePie and Markiplier and all these guys around to play the game. This is never going to go away now that it's been proven to work. This is now a repeatable formula, and it's definitely not going to go away in a post Five Nights at Freddy's world, where
movie.
Yeah, where now
2023.
where now every fucking IP scout and their mother is looking for the next Five Nights at Freddy's.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, you can see the world where the fucking Poppy Playtime or Benny the Ink Machine movie makes $200 million in 5 years.
Yeah, I just think that, again, we got to think about the economics of games, right? Economics of publishing games. You're going to want to always be identifying that solo game dev who makes that horror game that catches on, that you can get for you can buy that from them from a low cost, and you get those rights and you flip that into a major franchise. That's not going to stop. So I wouldn't be worried about it. I think we can be nostalgic about how maybe quaint it felt when like Slender popped off or whatever, but there's too much money for this to end until they drive it into the ground. But I don't really think you can drive the concept of identifying independent work and turning it into a franchise into the ground. I don't really think that's possible.
Sure.
It might just move on from horror.
Yeah, no, certainly. And hey, what about when the Minecraft movie comes out in 2 years?
That's going to be a bad day.
I'm greatly anticipating this. That's gonna be a fucking enormous moment for my life. I don't think it'll be good, but
Listen to the last comment. This video's going too long. I'm antsy.
our friend Adam Hurd, who goes by the pseudonym Velt Falsetto, says, this might be a little bit negative, but I honestly can't think of anything for the last 10 years of games that I'll miss. We are in the peak of corporate greed, the early stages of games taking themselves seriously when it comes to diversity of expression and experience, and honestly, we're kind of in a slump when it comes to creativity, at least in my opinion. I don't want to be so negative about the state of games today, but I feel like each AAA publisher has its own house style and is too afraid to experiment outside of that. Lots of middle ground publishers have basically ceased to exist, and even in the indie space, there's a lot of chasing the genre that gets the most clicks. If anything, I'm looking forward to when that changes and what sparks that change and it's something I think is close. I'm excited for when AAA publishers figure out that their formula from the 360 PS3 gen is no longer fun. Disagree there, but excited to see more and smaller developers find ways to express their individual cultures and experiences through the medium, and excited for publishers struggling to remain relevant in AAA spaces to learn to back off a little and be okay with being smaller. Again, I don't want to be too Jeez, I'm slurring my words a little bit too. It might be the Bailey's going in my head.
2 sips you had.
Hey, it was a little more than that. It tastes like ass. Though I like the creaminess, so I could just like drink cream and I'd get a better experience.
Probably.
Again, I don't want to be too negative about the current generation, but I feel like we've been stagnant for a long while now, and that soon we'll see this burst of creativity from somewhere that'll kick everyone's asses into gear. So no, I don't think I'll be nostalgic for much. Just grateful for the lessons this gen teaches the next gen and how much better it makes games for the future. No, and he says, just not answer the question. But I think that you did. I think you answered it in a very interesting and distinct way, is that the current state that we're in its stagnation, in the trends that we are currently experiencing, specifically because, Adam, you're a more cynical person on your worldview of this, and the current genres that are dominating and the big games that are popular are not for you, and that is totally okay. And what that means is that you won't have nostalgia for this. That is totally fine. That is one of the options on the check boxes. And I've been mostly approaching it from the positive reflection point of view. And I still do think that through some of the things that we've talked about here, whether it is open world games or some of these genres or design types that don't appeal to you, Adam, that there is things to be positive about looking back on this era of games, and as I would contest for myself. But yeah, not being nostalgic for this because you didn't care about it is totally fine. And I also agree that this is maybe a generation from a certain point of view that will act as just a learning point of these are the mistakes we made and we don't have to necessarily make them going into the future. And maybe the era you'll have nostalgia about is the next 10 years. And then 10 years after that, you'll feel the nostalgia that I'm currently feeling for the 2010s. But yeah, you did answer the question. You gave us an interesting talking point.
I also just don't think there's anything wrong with the industry having a bad period.
Sure, yeah.
In working on Console Chronicles, I've been doing a lot more reading into and thinking about and learning about Gen 1, Gen 2, which has been a really interesting process, just in that I don't really have very much... I
just got delivered a cucumber mayo mash.
Sure. I don't have really too much or any interest in first, second generation systems myself at all.
Yes.
But sort of in learning about the sort of infamous crash in '83, the reality is that was really just a crash in North America, and this is the same time that like microcomputers were in the UK and everything were cultivating a lot of really innovative, new design, and bedroom coders are working and breaking into the industry, and there's a lot of good stuff happening at the same time that the industry, especially from an American perspective, was defined by complete failure.
Yeah.
And that failure resulted in the launch of the NES and resulted in what were, for the time, some sort of backwards practices from Nintendo, but practices that ultimately resulted in a healthier industry in some key ways.
Sure.
So I think you can look at this time in a similar light and say, okay, yeah, AAA, whether you like the games or not, is no doubt homogenized, is no doubt struggling with monetization, is no doubt struggling with timelines, is no doubt struggling in very key ways that will probably result in a 83 style crash for, again, as it was in 83, a sector of the games industry.
Absolutely.
And will continue to have the good stuff that is happening now, but everything that is ill or excess will be forced to change. Yeah. And so I think we can look back in time and admonish this generation, but in a silver linings way, be pleased that...
Glad that it happened.
That this... I hesitate to say that because there's so many people whose lives are going to be ruined by this and whose lives are already being ruined by it.
That happens with every bad thing.
Yeah, but...
You can still be glad that they happened.
Yeah, but my thing... Yeah.
Incurred positive change.
Yeah, my thing is, it should have been obvious that the iceberg was coming.
Sure.
So people shouldn't have had to lose their jobs by the thousands to get here. But
Yeah.
when time has passed and we are thinking about the medium of games and even the industry, if this complete combustion is what it's going to take to fix things or improve things, well, then that's something to look back on in a sort of interesting way. Again, I wouldn't say a positive way, just because so many people's lives are being trampled in the process, but it will likely result in time in something for the player that's better. And also probably for the health of the studios is better.
Yeah, 100%.
So I think that's a very complicated point to end on, but if a portion of the industry completely collapses, it will come back better. But it'll come back less, and it will come back hopefully with a lot of the people who caused this sort of paying for what they've done. I mean, a lot of these executives making these decisions could be fired right now, and they would be fine for the rest of their lives, right? And put
well, because most of them are old.
Yeah, they're old, but they also have a lot of money. So if those people lose their jobs, whatever. Let's get somebody better who actually advocates for, again, the over 6,000 people who lost their jobs this year. It's fucking
You're
ridiculous.
doing the job that fucking Jeff Keighley wouldn't.
Yes. So, yeah, Adam, I mean, Adam's outlook on the industry and mine, I think, are they're similar in a lot of ways. So that's kind of my piece. Even if we're not nostalgic for the output of the time, or happy about the output of the time, or I think fairly critical in a lot of elements of the time, well, it's going to pass. And I think the overarching point of this conversation is that the industry we're working with in 10 years will not be this one.
Absolutely. Yeah. And that's what I'm so excited to see, and why I'm so excited to talk about this now and try to future project and use this as a thought exercise. Is this now exists as a time capsule to look back on in 10 years and be like, okay, that happened, that didn't happen, this is still popular, that completely changed in a way you weren't expecting, people don't feel this way at all. You have to have these conversations in order to look back on them in any way, and I, for one, as you posited earlier, I'm excited for change. I'm not only because I think that probably what's coming next is better, and that makes me incredibly happy because I was already very happy with the current state of what the last 10 years has been for games. But because I just find change interesting. I find the idea that things don't stay the same to be the only constant in this world, and I there's a juice to that really gets my bones flowing. But thank you, Abram and everyone, for joining me, listening to all of this, listening to us ebb and flow through all these different ideas and concepts, and hopefully you learned a little something. Hopefully it made you think a little bit about what the last 10 years has been and what the future might hold.
I'm clapping for you. That's a good topic idea.
That's a really big chip clip. Or is it like a binder clip?
Yeah, I guess it'll be a binder clip.
But I hardly even know her.
Put it on your ball.
Can you do ventriloquism convincingly over like digital means?
You probably
you can
could,
do it
but it'd be
easily
it'd be less impressive, I think.
It'd be significantly less impressive, yes.
Yeah, you're fine. I think that reset seems to have fixed it.
Sure. Maybe it was all the illicit substances I was feeding into my computer earlier.
Sure, like castor oil.
Is that an illicit substance?
Probably for a computer. Because put it this way, like if a moth eats like a poppy plant, right? It's not going to prison. It's not an illicit substance to the poppy. It's not to the moth, right?
If you ate a poppy plant, I know that's where cocaine comes from.
I think, so, yeah, a drug comes from poppies.
Yeah.
Opium.
I don't.
Opium?
Yeah, no, that's right. That's right. That's right. Now I don't think eating the poppy plant is illegal.
Or put it this way: if Paul got off the bed and snorted a rail of cocaine, right? It's
He's
fine.
not going to jail.
It's fine.
It's legally fine. He would probably die.
The point I'm making is that you can.
How much cocaine can you take on an average day? I don't like. Do people measure the by like the length of the line. Like how many inches of coke can you take?
It's like Trace Race in Mario Party. That'd be a great idea.
Yeah.
Yeah, do it in some loop-de-loops across the table.
Yeah. Zigzag back and forth. do it like a square saw. Like...
You do it like one of those puzzles where there's a bunch of ladders and you have to get to the bucket at the bottom. You have to pick the right line to follow.
Sure, like that one level in Sonic Superstars.
Like that one level in Sonic Superstars, yes.
Except up in that one.
That's a good point.
All right.
Would you rather do a line of cocaine or replay Sonic Superstars?